Okay, Year 10, continuing with our study of the skills required to analyze argument. We've done a great job of identifying the argument in a persuasive text and doing that on the back of identifying the relevant PGTs and identifying the issue itself. Now we're looking at what is the tone being used by the author in a persuasive text, and in the next video we're going to look at, well, what's the impact on the audience, or the likely impact. The tone is that element of a text that really hits you in the feels, okay? Actually elicits a reaction from the audience. So in order to understand an argument, we need to understand tone. Okay, really simple definition of tone is the attitude of the author demonstrated in the language they use in the text, okay? So there's a few things I want to unpack here. The attitude of the author. What are they trying to communicate to the audience? A perhaps less formal way of saying this is the vibe. What sort of vibe are you getting? But as importantly, we actually need to use evidence from the text to show what the tone is, okay? That's where we find the clues. We can separate tones into three categories. And this is the way that the PGTs are portrayed in the text, okay? What sort of language am I using to talk about this particular person, group, or thing? We might come across a positive tone, a hopeful, perhaps it's sympathetic towards the person in the opinion piece. Maybe it's enthusiastic about a possible solution. Often in opinion pieces, we might have an accusatory tone, okay? It is accusing the government of failing to do X. Maybe it's condemning, okay? Condemning a certain action taken by a group. Oftentimes it may be somber, okay? If we're talking about tragedy or something that is, negative in society, we may have a somber tone. We can also, though, have a neutral tone. Perhaps I'm just trying to give you the facts, early on in the piece, or I'm just using measured, objective evidence to support my argument before I maybe shift back into a more negative or positive tone. This is the language that we're going to use when we describe the tone in the piece. Okay, here is an opinion article from The Guardian by an Indigenous human rights lawyer. Okay, and let's see if we can first identify the PGTs. As soon as I see a person, 19-year-old young fella, Stanley, from my home vote, was found unresponsive. So here's one PGT that I can see. Black Lives Matter protests could be a PGT. It may not be the most relevant, but we can look at it there. Prisons and Australian governments, I think, is another pretty significant PGT. Again, looking for the most relevant ones. Was found unresponsive at a privately run Acacia prison. My heart broke with the devastating news last week. This use of devastating immediately shows the author's attitude towards this PGT and the event being described in this paragraph. Another black death in custody. It comes after at least 437 other deaths since 1991. Immediately, I'm getting a somber tone. A somber tone. Somber is a more nuanced way of saying very sad, tragic. He was so young, links back to that idea of tragedy, eligible for a lease in 6 months. So see how it's this, we are being hit over and over again with this idea of just the tragedy of the situation, and that is building a somber tone. While the Black Lives Matter protests continue, there's been little media coverage or outrage over his death from the broader community. The silence is suffocating. I would say again, this is also very somber. Not only the fact that this is happening, but that no one in the media is talking about it. Okay. She then goes on to describe the consequences of people, imprisonment, and the impact it has on them. So if I was to describe the tone of this piece in these first 4 paragraphs, Let's say it's a negative tone or a somber tone. Okay. Tone, to review, is the attitude of the author towards a PGT demonstrated in the language, being categorized as positive, negative, or neutral. In order to identify tone, we first look at the PGTs and then the language, the devastating news, for example.